And when controversy and conflict are what most immediately attract readers and viewers, the good news is there's so many of you that are pushing against.
Hey, y'all hush. I'm trying to work.
And as a citizen of this great democracy, I am grateful for that. For this is also a time around the world when some of the fundamental ideals of liberal democracies are under attack, and when notions of objectivity and of a free press and of facts and of evidence are trying to be undermined, or in some cases ignored entirely. And in such a climate, it's not enough just to give people a megaphone. And that's why your power and your responsibility to dig and to question and to counter distortions and untruths is more important than ever. Taking a stand on behalf of what is true does not require you shedding your objectivity. In fact, it is the essence of good journalism. It affirms the idea that the only way we can build consensus.
Hey, what's up, Silva? Can you hear me? Yo, Silva. Okay, you just don't want to say anything? That makes me sad. You're just going to chat with me? Hey, do you have Compost's telephone number? Oh, your mic doesn't work. Okay. Hey, text Compost because they missed yesterday as well. Make sure they're coming in. If not, we're going to get started. I'm going to pause the recording for a moment. You guys have to put in the chat to tell me what do you choose. And I know there's not 8 of you necessarily, but let's out of the 2 of you, if one of you chooses 500, no dice for any of you. Or actually, let's say if 2 of you, if both of you choose 500, one of you can choose 500. And if you choose 500, well then nobody if both of you choose 500, nobody gets anything. If both of you choose 50, well then I'll give you $50. All right. Well, I don't know if you guys can you guys use the chat function or not? Compost, can you use the chat function?
Chat to everybody.
I'm sorry?
Do you want us to do it to where it's only towards you or towards everybody?
Just to me. Private chat to me.
Yeah, I've done it twice.
Oh, well, it's not showing up on my end. It's terrible. Well, I'm curious. What did you choose?
50.
50. You're a reasonable person. All right. So I did this yesterday, and it literally came out with 8 people that selected 500. I won't tell you who they are, but they mess it up, and so everybody ended up getting $10. And I'm kidding. I'm not going to give everybody $10, especially not in the situation we're in right now. But you would have thought that most of the time people would cooperate and say, well, I'm going to take $50. I'm going to share something else with you really quick, and then we're going to get started. It's about a 10-minute little short clip of a video.
Okay.
All right. Stop share, and I want to go to share. Show windows. All right, you should be able to see this.
Hello, I'm Jeff Sayer McCord. I teach philosophy at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm going to speak to you today, The Prisoner's Dilemma. Consider the following situation. You and Isabella commit a diamond heist. Days later, you're both arrested, and the police have enough to charge and convict you of parole violation, for which you will each get 3 years in prison. Though they have their suspicions and the police have recovered the diamonds, they have no hard evidence that you two are the ones who robbed the jewelry store. Yet the detective is no slouch. She decides to make each of you an offer. If one of you, and not the other, confesses and rats on the other, agreeing to turn state's evidence, then that person will go free while the other will serve 15 years for robbery. If both of you confess and rat on each other, then while neither will serve 15 years, you will both serve 10 years in prison. Assuming for a minute that you each only care about minimizing your time in prison, you would prefer that Isabella remain silent while you rat her out and thus go free. You are just about to tell the detective you will testify against Isabella when you realize that she's in the very same situation. If she reasons as you have and so turns state's evidence against you, you and she will end up serving 10 years each, not getting off scot-free. So you realize you're better off and she's better off if you both just remain silent, working together to foil the detective's efforts to get a confession. Since Isabella is in the same situation, you figure she must realize this too. And so your plan to remain silent is set. Until, that is, it occurs to you that if Isabella is going to remain silent, then you can get off with no jail time simply by ratting her out. Moreover, if this last thought occurs to Isabella and she decides to rat you out, you will still do better ratting her out, since instead of doing 15 years in prison, you would have to do only 10. So no matter what Isabella does, you do better turning state's evidence against her. And the same is true of her. As a result, you both conclude you need to confess and rat on the other, with the predictable and sad result of you both serving 10 years instead of the 3 years you would have had if only you had together remained silent. Then some good luck strikes, and you and Isabella find yourselves alone in a room together. Taking the opportunity, you talk and agree to stay silent so as to serve only 3 years rather than 10. When you are then separated, you rest easy, thinking you have together been able to at least minimize your jail time. Until, that is, you realize that if you turn Isabella in, you won't have to serve any time. Unless, of course, she turns you in too. But if she's going to break your agreement and turn you in, you'd better turn her in to avoid 15 years in prison. You are stuck again, predictably, doing worse than you might have done. You both are. If only. If only what? Well, if you could count on her to keep her word, you could then keep yours and end up with a sentence of only 3 years. Or you could turn her in and go scot-free. But you can't count on her to keep her agreement, at least if she realizes that you might well not keep yours. So she needs to be confident that you won't break yours. But then she will have a strong incentive to break hers. And if you know that of her, you too will have a strong incentive to break yours. That is the prisoner's dilemma. Understanding the underlying structure of this dilemma, it turns out, can shed light on a broad range of phenomena. Consider, for instance, the so-called tragedy of the commons. The classic version of such a tragedy is found in thinking about a public grazing area, a village commons, where all the members of a town are free to graze their sheep. If all restrain their use of the commons, enough will be available for all and herds can thrive. But as long as others are restraining their use of the commons, each person in the village will do even better for themselves or for their family or for the charity to which they will donate their earnings by allowing their sheep to graze a bit longer. But if everyone in the village does that, then the herds will eventually fail. If they're going to fail, then it's better to graze longer now so as to allow your sheep to live longer. The incentives are such that unless people can count on others not to graze their sheep too long, each has a strong incentive to allow their own sheep to graze longer. But if people can count on others not to graze too long, then each has a strong incentive to graze longer. The predictable result will be the destruction of the commons. We can replace the village.
Okay, now I'm going to go back to what we were working on before. And let's see if I can find that. Da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Come on, buddy. You exist. Surely I didn't close that. Here it is. All right. So I'm going to take that same idea and I'm going to apply it to fitness. So in fitness, we know that that it's not just your ability to survive that increases your fitness. It's your ability to survive, reproduce, and your offspring be able to live to a reproductive age themselves, and so that you actually get grandchildren. The whole idea is to propel your DNA into the next generation, and living alone is not enough for that. So you actually have to have organisms that are going to carry your DNA and go forward. So your children need to actually survive. So bats have a very similar situation as to the prisoner's dilemma. So the bat's dilemma is with, in this case, vampire bats. And vampire bats, they have a very difficult time acquiring food. So a vampire bat, the females are going to be a little larger. They're going to have to find mammals. Generally, mammals are going to be their prey, and they can't just go out and just find mammals all that easily. And some mammals have a lot of fur, so they have to get through that fur, and that's kind of a difficult situation. So they like to find certain animals, and they prey on certain species more than others. They generally aren't going to just bite anywhere as well. They're not going to take the neck or anything that's highly vascular to bleed out that animal, or an animal that's going to recognize that there's a problem. But what they do is they'll get tips of the organism. So like the ears, any kind of appendage like an ear or a toe. Like if we were there in Central America, South America, they would bite the tips of our fingers. They have an anesthetic in their saliva as well as an anticoagulant, something that would stop the platelets from forming scabs. And they would be able to sit there and lap up that blood. Now, females are a little larger than males. And what females tend to do is when they come back and they are successful, share that blood meal with other individuals that are in their group. And so in this case, if we use this kind of like a Punnett square, and we'll go to these two bats here, you can see their fitness is 0.9. So let's consider that 90% survivability. So if bat B and bat A, if they're sharing their meals all the time, they might be a little hungrier because they're on average sharing a meal every other day or so. If one's successful one night and the other isn't. So if bat A is successful one evening and bat B isn't, bat A shares with bat B. Or if bat B is more successful than bat A, then bat B shares with bat B shares with bat A. So they're both a little hungrier, but they're both surviving on average about 90% of the time. Now we can cross, in this case it would be like multiplying, but it's not really multiplying. It's just taking these two numbers and dividing them. So if bat A doesn't share and bat B does share, well, bat B is not going to get having much of an advantage. Bat B is not going to get shared with, and so bat B is going to die whenever it needs a meal when it gave food to bat A. So in this case, if we take these two, and we average 1 and 0, then average is 0.5. There's a 0.5 survivability in this scenario between the two. Likewise, if bat A is sharing with bat B and bat B isn't sharing, well then bat B survives because they get food and they're successful other nights. And bat A is not doing all that well. It's giving away its food. But again, if I take 0 from bat A and 1 from bat A, then that's an average of 0.5, half the time they survive. And bat B to bat, B here, that's also going to be 0.5. And if I average the two here within the same category, they're going to be 0.5. Now, they could decide, and 0.5 has 50% chance of survival. And they could both decide not to cooperate with one another, and no cooperation either way. They just hold their food. If they do, they get a survivability of about 40% chance of reaching survival. So clearly this is the worst outcome. This would be the second best, but cooperating is always going to be the best. And so in the prisoner's dilemma, or in dilemmas in game theory, it's always better to cooperate than not to cooperate. It's always better to have alliances than not have alliances. Think about the North American Treaty Organization, NATO. We're part of NATO, so we have alliances, and alliances make you stronger. You had the Axis powers versus the Allied powers. Alliances made them overall stronger. So when you go into a situation, it's usually going to be always, not usually, but always going to be better to cooperate. Until you find somebody that doesn't cooperate with you, you cut that person out or that organism out. Now, how does this relate to the coronavirus epidemic? So the coronavirus epidemic, you can think about that in terms of organisms cooperating. In these terms, we're talking about us cooperating. And different cultures and countries have different types of culture. So, and we have what we call an individualistic culture or a collectivist culture. So in a collectivist culture, you're more focused on the group. You're really focused on the benefit of everyone. You feel a strong responsibility to yourself, your immediate family, as well as your extended family. So you might be just as concerned about your cousins as you would be your brothers and sisters, or your grandparents as much as you would be worried about your parents. So you have a very strong network. And then likewise, those cousins and grandparents are going to, be more likely to work with you. Employee commitment, you're extremely committed to your employer. You often will take a job, hold that job your entire life. If not, you'll stay within the same industry and maybe work with somebody else that you're familiar with, that you've worked with in the past. Work and private life are extremely close. You work and play in the same areas. You work with your coworkers. You also play with your coworkers. So your private and work life are intertwined. Multi-generational households. You get a pleasure and a sense of satisfaction from the group at large, your country at large, your family at large, all winning. So, contrast it with an individualistic society. They're more focused on the individual. Responsibility from yourselves, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, support your immediate family, your wife, your children, your husband, whatever. Your immediate family is your primary responsibility. You're worried about your mobility. You're worried about being able to advance in your career. You may not stay with the same employer. You see a better opportunity in another place. You jump. You don't mind moving. You're not as strongly connected to your extended family, so mobility is not a problem. I don't mind moving. Private and work life are separate. You work hard, you play hard. You're off at 4, you're off at 5. That's it. That's the end of the day. Pleasure from your achievement, your individual achievement. You may even have some animosity for others who achieve more than you. So that's an individualistic culture. I probably lie somewhere in between. You guys know, like for me, my private and work life are kind of tied together. My son went to Summit. I don't mind you guys getting in contact with me late at night. I've been at our school for a very long time. I tend not to be more on the individualistic side, but a little more on the collectivist side. If you look here, there's a spectrum, the United States to Guatemala. In Guatemala, they score a 6 in terms of, and this is a scale of 1 to 100. So the United States scores a 91, very much an individualistic culture. Guatemala is the most collectivist culture in the world. And we're going to show you some stats here, so at least some data. So if I look at countries that rank high on individualism, well, the United States, not surprisingly, is high. This PDI is what we call a power distribution index. And that also runs from a scale of 100 to 0. So in this case, when we're scoring here in the United States a 40, meaning that we're not real comfortable with the distribution of power being so great. So we'll tend to say, nah, when we can build our own wealth. I can become into the world poor and end rich. We don't see that as an insurmountable feat to actually improve our economic and political standings. Australia is very similar to us. And you could imagine, I mean, they broke away from Britain just like us, started out as in kind of a rebellious culture. And rebellious cultures tend to be very more individualistic and reject a power. England, that would be the parent to us, has a very similar situation. So in this case, you can see some other countries. These are the top 10 countries, and we're going to look at some data in terms of the pandemic and the model that they use in terms of individualism versus collectivism, whether to defect and not cooperate or to cooperate. If we look at medium cultures, they're kind of in the middle of this spectrum. You see Japan, and a lot of people wouldn't think this, but Japan does kind of lie in them, not kind of, they do lie in the middle. So they rank a 46. So they are somewhere between individualistic and collective. But they still will tend to honor extended families, and then all that is very important. But they also think about social and political economic mobility as well. But this might surprise you a little bit, but probably it shouldn't. Any idea why these 6 countries all have a power distribution index of 80? And they're all exactly the same here? What other factor might come into play? And chime in. I know, Sylvia, you can't say anything, but Compost, do you have any idea?
Maybe based on how close the communities are to each other,
Think
like
about
how densely populated.
That's a thought. I want you to take a look at the countries: Egypt, Iraq, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Saudi Arabia. What would be a commonality amongst these 6 countries?
They have larger populations.
Kuwait's a tiny little place.
Oh.
So is Lebanon. It's not that. It's very patriarchal. Any idea what religion that all 6 of these countries tend to adopt?
I don't know much about religion.
All right. Well, you have any idea, Sylvia? Can you chat in the chat? Oh, I got something. So go ahead and say something.
She said Muslim.
Oh, well, yeah. So that would be what you would be if the religion would be Islam. So yeah, they're Islamic countries, and these countries are very patriarchal. They see a clear distinction between who has power and who does not. A lot of times they have authoritarian types of situations. This is very much Egypt has a military that's in control of the government. In Saudi Arabia, it's a kingdom. Libya, this is also a militaristic situation. There was an authoritarian regime there for a very long time. It's just recently been overthrown in the last 4 years. But they tend to have a power structure, and they accept that power structure. But they're also tend to be a little more collectivist. So extended family does matter. These would be low individualistic, high collectivist societies. And in this case, we've got Taiwan, it being the 10th from the bottom, but in this case, Guatemala being the top collectivist, very far away from being an individualistic country. They tend to see, hey, this is where I'm born into this situation. I stay in this situation. I'm okay with power distribution being set, and I don't think I can do anything about it. But they are extremely collectivist. They do not see individualistic situations. They think of themselves as a whole and not as an individual. And it's kind of funny. The country I want to deal with in just a moment is actually 2 above this, 12 from the bottom on individualistic societies, and that's South Korea. They weren't quite there. I gave you the top 10, bottom 10, and middle 10. But so if you look at the curve in South Korea, and this is daily new cases, their peak, they hit their peak really within 2 weeks and then started decreasing. 3 weeks after the epidemic started within this country, they had it under control, and it's been flat ever since. They did their job. You lock down, you get tested, you do what the country tells you to do, and don't move. Do what you're told. There was one preacher And it's funny because the preacher was trained in the United States who violated this, and he was shamed, highly shamed in Korea. You can go back and you can see that he had to go on national television, literally get on his knees and beg forgiveness for the country because he was violating it and tending to err on a more individualistic side, and had to pay respect and beg for forgiveness. In South Korea, the doubling time for the death rate took 19 days on average. It took 19 days for you to double your death rate. And notice the death rate never even broke 10 a day. Japan, they were kind of in the middle. Excuse me, I went past Japan. Japan is kind of in the middle. There was this situation where they were kind of rising and a little flat, and recently they've kind of taken off, and so they've actually battened down the hatches. Doubling time though in Japan was 12 days for the death rate. Still pretty flat, but not quite as flat as in South Korea. In the United States, we had our first case reported on February 15th. You can see there's not much going on here. Probably that's because we weren't testing very well. We didn't have a very good method in place for testing. And one of the reasons we didn't, because we were very individualistic, weren't thinking about the collective, where South Korea had a system in place for pandemics just in case. And the United States didn't. We just don't think about these things as a whole. They think about them as a whole, while we think of these as individualistic. So we had some catch-up time, but you can see we're on an exponential curve. It's quite ridiculous. And you can see at this point, daily new cases, we're approaching 40,000. Here, we've had the last 4 days, we've had approaching 2,000 deaths a day. That's a lot of people. Now, granted, per capita, it's a lot lower than these other countries. They're smaller, but there's still the doubling time. If you look at the doubling time, 4 days. Every 4 days, double, until actually looks like we've reached a plateau in the last 4 days, and it's been approaching 2,000 deaths a day. So why is it that way? Well, probably because we don't tend to cooperate. We're more individualistic, and when you cooperate in a social trap, in a prisoner's dilemma, you tend to do better. Your fitness tends to stay higher. You're more. There is group selection over individual selection. So natural selection doesn't act just on the individual. Selection can act on groups as well. So what your task is to actually cut, and I do. I think this is fantastic. Just a couple of days ago, when I was planning this lesson, there was a podcast I was listening to. And if you click on this link later, and I'll attach it, it's already attached to Corona Shutdown on the website. You can listen to these 2 minutes, between 33 and 35 minutes, and you can listen to a guy actually compare us to a prisoner's dilemma in terms of our masks and our mask buying masks. So I'm going to give you an example that I wrote. And in this example, I'm coming back to what we call a tragedy of the commons, where we left off with the sheep. So this was posed quite a long time ago. This is the source I cited from a book. I actually have this book at home, and I just took this direct quote. And that when we use a common resource, and I want you to think of all the different types of common resources. And I believe here they have clean air as a resource, open oceans, fish, migratory birds, Antarctica. Antarctica is the air conditioning of the globe. Gases in the lower atmosphere, so CO2, O2, in this case ozone that's in the stratosphere. The stratosphere is going to have ozone to prevent UV light from penetrating the atmosphere and causing cancers, and not just causing cancers in us, but also that UV light breaking down the DNA and hurting organisms, even plants. It reduces photosynthesis. So photosynthesis uses the spectrum, the visible spectrum of light, but this is a much higher frequency of light. It breaks down these plants and kills them, and they no longer produce oxygen or food. Space would also be a common resource. So we have the planet, and around the planet we have the outer space, or not really outer space, but inner space around our planet, and we have satellites that are in orbit. So that is a common place. No one owns that. But it's being overexploited. So there are some data that shows that if we do not do something about how much space junk we leave into orbiting the Earth, we may not even be able to get off the Earth in 15, 20 years. Literally not be able to send astronauts through that debris and those satellites that circle and orbit our planet to even get to the moon or Mars. because there'll just be a barrier. It'd be too hazardous to try to move a rocket or a space vehicle through that debris field. So the tragedy is everybody overusing a common resource because they're thinking, man, if I don't use it, or if they're going to use too much of it, then I'm not, then I'm not going to get my fair share. So everybody just piles on and overuses this. So I've written a couple of examples, and you need to write one back to me. So in this case, I'm going to give you what I would consider to be a high example or a good example. I have on here, there's 150 fishermen that are fishing a certain population of fish, the same population of fish. And there's 22,500 fish which can be harvested in the season of a week. And so maybe there's different species that they harvest at different times of the year. So obviously your fishing season is going to be limited just to 1 week. But for this population of fish, 1 week is it. There's a market value of $20 per fish. If the number of fish exceeded that harvested exceeds 22,500, the population is going to crash. And if they do that, they're not going to be able to have enough fish for the next season. If everyone cooperates and everybody cooperates and they only harvest 150 fish at $20, they're going to make 3,000 if everybody cooperates. If somebody harvests 200 fish at $20, well, that's 4,000, and they'll exceed the quota. If they do this, then some people are going to lose business, and the next season there's only 15,000 fish that can be harvested, and then at that point, probably everybody's going to lose their business. So this would be my example, and the reason that this is a high example is that I give the number of people, in this scenario. I give the total amount of that resource, and I have that resource divided out to where there's a clear choice that needs to be made. I can only harvest 150, and by doing so and cooperating, everybody gets paid, and everybody gets to fish the next season. The math works out perfectly. 22,500 divided by 150 is 150 fish per person, and everybody gets paid 3,000. A medium example is where maybe the math doesn't quite all work out and there's not a clear understanding as to what you can do. And therefore, it makes it harder to cooperate. So 150 fishermen are fishing. There are 22,500 fish. Again, the season still shows 1 week. And then you can't go outside of this number of fish that are harvested. It tells us that there's $3,000 that need to be made, but there's not a clear understanding of what those losses might actually be. We just see that, hey, look, if I exceed 150, and we don't know what the consequence is going to be next year. We don't know that there's going to be 15,000 fish that can be harvested. So there's a consequence, and we know what we need to do, but we don't actually know what the outcome is going to be for sure if we don't cooperate. This example, we don't know what's going on. It's a prisoner's dilemma. It's a social trap. It shows that there has to be collectivist ideas, but it doesn't really make anything clear. There's 150 fishermen. The population of fish isn't stated. We don't know how many fish exactly there are. It's therefore, how do I know if I exceeded it or not? I don't know if I've exceeded it. So there's no clear understanding. All we know is if I harvest 150 a piece or catch 200 fish, I mean, I have a choice to make. I can get 150 or 200, but I don't know what the population is. So what do I choose? So the choices here aren't very clear. So what you have to do is give me another common resource. In this case, choose something that's common. It could be lots of things. So yesterday I had kids that chose, I think it was one of them wrote about like a dorm room. Another one was talking about sharing, what was it that they were going to share? But they were thinking about their university next year. Oh, space within the classroom where they were going to be taking classes and making sure that they were going to, all be able to utilize the front part of the class. Because I believe last week we talked about proximity issues whenever you're trying to succeed your freshman year of college. You can choose whatever it is you want. The thing that makes this strong is to make sure that the choices are clear. You know what you have to do to benefit yourself as well as the whole group. You know what you have to do in order to cooperate. So I want to take some questions from you, and I think my wife is going to come in here in a second. So ask away, kiddos.
Isn't this kind of mostly based off of how selfish people can be?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've noticed a trend.
Yeah, I mean that's essentially what it is, and selfish organisms tend not to be very successful because nobody wants to cooperate with someone that's continually selfish.
Yeah. Because whenever you brought up the priest, it kind of reminds me of my own mother right now. Because I'm still working, and she's worried about me, but at the same time, she's saying that as long as we believe in Christ, we'll be completely sheltered. And it took my sister getting on to her for the past 2 weeks for her to actually start, like, what's it called, disinfecting, and overall trying not to go out anytime she can.
So she was not wanting to cooperate, and I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. So she wasn't cooperating because she was thinking that something supernatural was going to protect her?
Yeah, God.
No. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't think that, and I don't want to, step on anybody's, faith is, it's just your parents' choices. Everybody has their own choice to make in terms of how they practice a religion. But I mean, I think an argument that you could be made would be like, well, if people to care for other people, most religions are going to be there to, there's going to be statements of providing care and assistance to others and to care for fellow man. And so by being careful, we're taking care of everyone. And then that would be something that would be, valued by a God, if whichever God that you worship.
Yeah, but it's just kind of, the issue is just exposing her and then continually expose other people. Like, the only thing that's happened at my job is that we've gotten more busy because people really like want to and kind of like rely on fast food.
Yeah, and you're working at Cane's, or you're working at Lincoln Square, right?
Yeah, Raising Cane's.
Raising Cane's, yeah. And so you've got, I'm sure there's a lot of people at business has been brusque over there, but you guys are just having drive-through, right?
We started that yesterday. We're only doing drive-through.
You had people eating in your restaurant yesterday?
We were allowed to have takeout, but nobody could eat inside.
Oh, okay, yeah, no one could eat inside, yeah.
But now we're locked up completely to where you can only do drive-through, no takeout.
Roger that. That's good. Well, I hope you're taking other, personal precautions.
Yeah.
I'd like to see some compost in about 25, 30 years. Come back and see what's up. Talk to the old man, because I will definitely be old in 30 years.
We'll see if I'll be there.
Well, I mean, be there.
Be around by then.
Who, me? If I'm alive, or you?
Me.
Well, I guess both of us. Whenever, it's not guaranteed, but I feel like you're probably going to be, the probability of you being alive is higher than me. So yeah, but nevertheless, I would enjoy watching all of us grow up. You guys growing up and me growing old. What other questions, if any, do you guys have?
Nah, so far nothing for me.
Sylvia, you want to chat something, kiddo?
She said no.
She said no. All right. Well, I'm going to leave you be. You guys have my number if you need to get in touch with me. How you can turn this in is simple. All you have to do is just literally text it to me through Remind, or if you'd like to type it out in an email and send it to me in an email, that suffices as well. And I'll try to get some continue to get some topics that are going to hopefully inspire us to think a little bit and not be too taxing, because I know you guys are finishing all of your IAs. Do you guys have any IAs that are outstanding?
For art class, me and Silva are still in it.
Y'all are in it to win it, or just in it?
Mix of both.
All right, but everything else is taken care of. You've dotted your I's and crossed your T's.
Hopefully.
All right. Well, you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's for biology, so that's all that matters, right? Just biology.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen. Be good and take some photos of your portfolios. I'd like to see what kind of artwork you guys came up with.
Okay.
All right. I'll upload this video to the website. You guys be good.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.